Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H event space. You are tuned into long-term projects, a labor of love. Clearly a labor of love. 'Cause it's a lot of labor, but a lot of love goes into it. Ian Spanier, welcome. It's been a while since we've had you on, man. A little bit.
A little bit, yeah. I think, well, it's a new year, so we can say this is the first time this year.
There we go. We
Yeah,
get that excuse. We can't use it any longer. And here, I thought it was like January 7th was the Happy New Year cutoff, but we're gonna slip that little New Year nod in there.
That's the Larry David rule, yes.
There it is. So we're talking long-term projects. This is one that I think is it's near and dear to my heart. I know it's obviously near and dear to your heart, but to a lot of our viewers, we like putting content and educational information out here that helps people. And I feel like this is a topic that a lot of people have trouble with, whether it's getting started, whether it's direction, whether it's where do I go, or you kind of get lost in the weeds. And then the longer the project is, I feel like it's harder to maintain a grasp on it and to kind of tie it up and get it where it needs to go. So we talked about this, you have your newest book that I know you're super excited to share and get to talking about. So we're gonna get some images up on the screen here and kind of scroll through some of these images while we talk. But the goal for this next hour is to help you all get to that point of working on a long-term project, seeing it from conception to whatever the final product is. In this case, it's Ian's book. But there's no better person to talk about this. It's fresh, it's hot off the press. It's something that you've been working on how long now?
I mean, believe it or not, it's a 17-year project in the works, and 35 for the author who wrote the all the fine words in the book. This is actually my third cigar book. You and I talked about this offline, but I'm not a cigar smoker by any means, and cigars are not a passion of mine. I sort of fell into this niche subject matter in 2007 when I was introduced to Aaron Sigmund, who's the author of this book as well. When I was on staff at a media company that launched a cigar magazine uh, of the likes that was meant to compete with Cigar Aficionado, which most people know, and it was called the Cigar Report. And Aaron and I, everybody calls him Sig, but Sig, basically hadn't known me, so he was sort of assigned me in a sense. But I was working for this media company and creating the sort of look and vibe along with the creative director Florian Bachleda of each of the magazines. And Cigar Report was slightly different. There was a different creative director called Warren Mason, who's a fantastic designer, and none of us knew each other. And essentially, thrown right into the fire. Very first thing we did was hop a plane over to the Dominican Republic to go photograph. I think we did something like 8 factories in 7 days. It was crazy. And that was my first experience in the cigar world. And then, we only had the existence to about 2009 when the company went Chapter 11, unfortunately, the entire media company, and it went away. But Aaron and I literally from day one just got each other. And so we worked together really well. We ended up doing a book called The Playboy Guide to Cigars soon thereafter. And then a couple of years ago, we did a book for Asaline publisher called Arturo Fuente on the Arturo Fuente factory family. And that while we were doing that, I can't remember where we were, but we were sitting at a meal and Sig turned to me and he said, "Do you realize that you have been doing this about 16 years now and you've probably had access to more people in the cigar industry, more places in the cigar industry than any other photographer that I know of? And here's a guy who's an expert on cigars and knows everything about cigars. It's been part of his life since he was, a teenager." And when we realized that, we sort of looked at each other and he goes, "That's our next book." And there it sort of started. And so after we finished the project for Asaline, we then started figuring out how are we going to take this, plethora of images and turn it into another coffee table book. And that's essentially the journey that we launched out in, let's say that was about 2021, 22.
Awesome. I want to go back to the beginning of that story there. Not a cigar smoker, and that was it's one of the most interesting things. You know, like you said, we're talking about it offline. It's like I couldn't wait to get online and talk about the because you said such an interesting line that you repeated here that a personal project or you know passion project doesn't have to be you don't have to be passionate about a personal project. It doesn't have to be a passion project, and I think that's such an interesting thing because we always see those two words attached. We always see passion and personal project, and like you think, okay, if it's a personal project, it's something that I have to do, and those projects that I'm not really passionate about are saved for commercial projects or projects that you're just doing for work or for money. Can we dive a little bit into more into that? I mean, you're a professional, so I know you're going to put your best work forward, but can you talk a little bit about the difference in doing a project that you're passionate about versus something that you're maybe not as passionate about? You're still going to turn out the same product, but internally, what's going on?
I mean, I'm guilty of the thing I think a lot of photographers are, which is that I love to shoot. So, you know, I've always sort of been of that mindset that I'll find something interesting in whatever's in front of my lens. And, the cigar process, which I learned very quickly in that trip to the Dominican, is really interesting to watch. I mean, not a lot of people get to go to a factory. I've learned over time that most of the cigar smokers, the people that we're actually appealing towards, have never even been on a factory tour, and it's so worth it. It's really cool to see from seed to final packaging how a cigar is made. We understand that there's essentially like 200 hands that touch a single cigar from start to finish. So it's just an amazing thing to watch. And then traveling to all these different countries and how they treat the process the same but different. The different theories, they call a lot of these blenders of the cigars, the people that come up with the blending of the tobacco leaves to create the taste of a cigar, they're masters of what they do. So there's something intriguing on that end. Much to the same in my commercial work where, I am a guy who's into fitness. I fell into the fitness world about the same time, about 17 or 18 years ago. Never thought I'd photograph fitness, but I took to it very naturally because of my sort of sports background, right? But what I think worked for me in that way was that I had a different view of it. And I think that's the same with the cigar thing. My view of it wasn't coming from a place of, I know all this stuff about cigars, so I can photograph it. Much the same in fitness. I knew some stuff about fitness, but my take on it was more as a portrait photographer, which is what I consider myself. So my approach to cigars is very much in that way as well. I'm making portraits of whether it's the people or the farm or the factory workers or the signs, the cool basically designs of these cigar boxes. I don't know if you kind of went through what I went through as a kid, but I remember our sort of parents' generation used to keep cigar boxes around forever, and they would keep trinkets in there and things like that. So I sort of always remembered that stuff, and um, maybe my only sort of experience with cigars prior to actually photographing it was, the occasional cigar playing golf with my friends or something like that. But really, probably more so, movies like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly and Clint Eastwood and things like that, where cigars were sort of that thing. I mean, even go to Arnold Schwarzenegger and all his movies. He always has a cigar in a movie somewhere, except for the kid movies, of course. But, the reality is that I didn't know anything. So that fresh take on something that is an old process, I think always lends itself to something unique, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, totally. And I think the cigars, I mean, they're photogenic. The entire everything, the realm of it, everything that you're photographing, it's like you're going to other countries. You're getting in spaces that people don't have access to. We all love that image of someone smoking, or I mean, that's ingrained in us from like old Hollywood films, the smoke curling, the right light. So it's like naturally knowing your work, it's like you're not going to turn down a good shot.
No,
You love
definitely
you
not.
love yourself a good shot and a good story.
Absolutely. And I think the other piece of it is that there's this aspect of what I found in doing this, that it encompasses everything I do. I talk often with you about the fact that yes, I consider myself a portrait photographer, and that's primarily what I do as a commercial photographer. But I've always been a photographer that shoots what he sees, and I follow the masters of photography that I admire so much, who shoot whatever it is in front of them. And as a result, it was a struggle. Certainly the first 10 years of my career, when people didn't understand that I could photograph the coffee cup sitting on the table but also do the portrait of the celebrity. And now it's coming to fruition where I am getting assignments, I think, because the nature of the beast, meaning the business has changed, where they need people to wear many hats now. But being the photographer that now can shoot the product shot and the celebrity on set, even if I only have 2 minutes in between a commercial take, that's who I am commercially, right? In the cigar world, there's so many things that go on that I get to sort of exercise all of those aspects of my brain, be it the portrait, be it the still life, be it the documentary style portraits or pictures or images of a factory or a farm, be it the travel aspect. Even some of the assignments that I've done over the years for different cigar companies are straight up travel photographs of cigar world. And so given all of those things, I get to sort of play with all those pieces that make me who I am as a photographer, which I would say is a multifaceted beast in a sense, because I do love to shoot so many different subject matters, and it's not just one thing.
Yeah, I'm so used to having you on here teaching lighting. And hey, I'm gonna turn this mop closet into a, a studio. It's like it's almost different seeing you out in the field, literally, out in here in these tobacco fields, taking these images. Can you talk a little bit about your process? Because especially for our viewer base, they probably see the same thing from you. It's like when I think Ian, I think diagrams, I think lights, I think schematics and all this stuff. What are you like as a photographer when you're taken out of that element? We get Ian out of LA, we get into another country, he's out in the middle of a tobacco field. What's the gear kit like? What are your setups like? Are you still kind of experimenting with some lighting, or how is that functioning?
I mean, I'm definitely always experimenting with lighting, whether it's natural light or artificial light. There's definitely a mix of things depending on what the assignment is and what the situation is. So I've been in the field with an assistant with lights, and we're having to create a quote unquote natural moment that doesn't exist in that moment, but we're meant to look like we'd been there for 3 weeks studying the process of, say a master blender, walking through a field at sunset, smoking a cigar when it's really noon, and we have the luxury of having some cheesecloth over our head to block the sun, and we're able to, throw a little light through an artificial light on our subject matter and make it feel like the vibe of a late day. We've been here for months studying this guy's process, sort of situation. So much of the stuff that ended up in the book and so much of the stuff that is part of this is more just guerrilla style, man. It's probably more akin to the way I know you work, which is like I'm just out there with the camera and I'm studying the light and I'm watching what can I do with the time of day that I'm here. And sometimes it's horrible and it's noon and what am I going to do? And sometimes it's fantastic and it's sunrise or sunset. I certainly push my ability to get the time of day that I want to be at a field when I can, but quite often I have no say. And certainly at the beginning, which is something I learned along the process, was when we're on these jobs where we're maybe doing a factory and we're hitting 5 factories in a day or 3 factories in a day, something like that. I got no choice but to just shoot and move, shoot and move, shoot and move. And whatever the light is, I'm going to have to figure it out. Now, equipment wise, it's gotten much, much easier. Cameras today can handle much better ISOs, but at this 2007, 2008 period, it was still early in that process. And so I was really pushing, that 800 ISO, 1600 ISO, and it was tough. And, thankfully having to go back to some of those images, or a lot of those images, I should say, for the book, this one being one in particular, the modernization of Lightroom and Photoshop now allow me to actually make these images better than they were when they originally were shot, thanks to the advances in the technology. And when I'm on a job, to answer your question in terms of a field, I'll have just couple cameras, couple lenses, um, plenty of memory cards, plenty of batteries, and that's pretty much how I roll. Some of the jobs I would take anything, as you know, I'm a Westcott pro, so I use a lot of the Westcott lighting. I would do anything from the FJ82 to the FJ200, which are the two smaller size strobes. Ambitiously, when we did Arturo Fuente, we had the FJ400, which is their bigger, heavier strobe. And I did have an assistant with me on all those jobs. And quickly realized the FJ200 was a much better travel light. It's smaller. We could fit everything into a backpack, and we were able to be a lot more flexible and mobile and not lack power, which was great. But for the most part, when I'm in a field, I'm looking for that natural light and just trying to figure out how can I make this the best possible. And it's luck sometimes, you know. Take the woman that you showed earlier of her walking with the tobacco leaves above her head. You know, it was a cloudy morning and we risked getting up for sunrise. We were up, you know, before sunrise and out in the field as the workers arrived. And quite honestly, the sun came out and I was able to shoot this. And again, technology has helped so much because I'm able to bring that dark, moody cloud in after the fact, whereas I'm making my exposure for my subject here and still being able to keep some detail. And then at the same time, in order to have a cohesive package with the projects where I did have light or locations where I did have light, I can light my subjects in a similar way. And so that everything sort of blends together where you realize that whether it's 2007 or 2024, this is the same photographer taking and creating these images, making these images.
I'm glad you went there because I really wanted to know it from a cohesion standpoint. If we're doing a project over a year or 2 years, it's probably a little easier. This is spread out over such a length of time. I was gonna, is it even an issue to have it as cohesive? Because I mean, you're not expecting everything to look exactly the same, but yeah, you do want it to look like it's the same photographer shooting in, and it's not just a hodgepodge of images that are coming into play. How are you laying it out? I'm really curious. The length of time is what has me, and there's a couple aspects that really make the whole project interesting. It's not just you. You're working with someone else who is an expert in their own right, and they have their own vision, and you kind of have to make sure that you're your own person and you're putting your own vision, but it has to be cohesive not only with your entire body of work over this time, but with the book and the project in general and what is going to be accompanying your images.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the good thing is that when Sig and I met, you know, the very first job, he sort of saw what I could do, and there was a trust that was built. And he's a fantastic creative director as well, and so we sort of work really well together in that way. He affectionately calls me Ronin quite often because I'll just sort of disappear and go shoot stuff, and he doesn't even worry about what I'm doing. He knows I'll get stuff that he needs. And then there's times where he has something that he absolutely needs to get across, whether it's part of the process or a story that he knows is going to be part of what he writes about in the book. And he will say, we need a photograph that represents this. What can you do with this part of the process or this part of the way that you approach what you're going to do? And so that sort of um, partnership has really worked quite well. Mind you, I should also mention Liliana Goya, who's the creative director for this book, who did a fantastic job as well. And, you know, she was in London with us for a week that we were in London, and having her alongside was even just another bonus because I was able to have somebody else's opinion coming in as well, which, you know, sometimes it's really hard to bear all the weight of having to not just be the photographer and be the, you know, quote unquote artist who's working on this, but also having this checklist to get through. You know, I don't have an assistant sitting by my side on all of these telling me, okay, we got that shot, we got that shot. Nobody's necessarily checking, especially when I'm out in the field. Nobody's looking at the back of the camera, you know, with me or looking at my images going to an iPad or anything along those lines. And then in terms of what you mentioned about the cohesiveness, it was actually very important to me that there was some cohesiveness between 2007 and 2024 and all of the images in between. So how I treated the images in post was meant intentionally to have things sort of makes sense that you wouldn't necessarily know what year this image was taken. That said, I've grown as a photographer. I mean, we all should be in 17 years, I would hope. But there's things that I can do now that I could not do in 2007, just from experience standpoint. And again, there's that technology aspect as well. But some of the images that I created, I maybe wouldn't been able to create them then. And maybe I would have seen it in my mind's eye, but just didn't have the technology to do it, or just didn't have the skill set to do it. But because of the things that have, those mop closets that you talk about, that has put me in a position to be a better photographer and to grow as a photographer and be able to bring new things to the project and see the world differently, especially in a situation where I've seen this process. It's the same process over and over and over again. This actually is a great image to represent that I don't know if I could make this image in 2007. And this, this actually came from a project I was doing for a cigar company where we were creating portraits of the workers around this factory. That's not a very interesting factory by any means. It's mostly just gray cinder block and sort of dead in color, and there's not a lot of light. So I convinced my client in that case to allow me to bring lights with me and have an assistant help me out, a guy called Christian Races, who works on a lot of projects with me since I moved to LA. And there's another assistant called Andrew Soria, who I also work with. Both guys are fantastic with knowing my style and working with me in that style. And, there is a behind the scenes of this setup on my Instagram. You have to dig a little bit for it, but it'll show the two of us sort of balancing over these wash bins, tucked into this corner to get this portrait, and me directing Christian to just drop that light just a little bit for me. And I'm checking the back of the camera. I'm speaking broken Spanish to this guy and, telling him he looks like a guy from a pizza joint in New York. And that's the attitude that I want. And, trying to convey that at the same time, and hardly being able to hear anything over the sound of this steam that's coming out of the pipe, which is quite loud. And, I look at this as such a success in terms of an image. And again, I don't know if I could have made it back in 2007, 2008. So I'm glad that I got here, and that sort of is nice to be able to have that journey of some of those images that came from 2007 all the way to today. That image that we had up earlier of the process, which is this same thing, which is cleaning up the tobacco leaves, washing them, is, a growth right there, right? So you have the guys in the distance in the first image that we showed with all of the leaves, and I made it about the leaves because I didn't have anything with me to highlight the people in that case. There was no light over there. But here I got the opportunity in a very similar scenario to bring light in and create an image that I know I can create today. Maybe I couldn't create it back then.
Dude, you had me over here like counting on my fingers. I'm like doing the math, and like you said, when you say 17 years, it doesn't equate in my head to 2007. I'm like, wow, 2007 has really been 17.
I know.
Mind blown. My
I'm
mind is
old.
blown over here.
I feel old.
I know. And I'm like, and then it's like, it's all making sense because I'm like, well, yeah, I would hope since 2007, you've grown, you've progressed. And I'm looking at myself and I'm like, man, how many different phases and skill levels and genres have I kind of sauntered through on my way to where I am at now? And it begs the question from me, you know, there might be an image that you kind of had it was the right moment, but you didn't capture it the way you would now. Were
Sure.
you going back and pouring through images and like, you know what? All right, I love this, something about it, but I didn't do it justice. I want to come back and recreate this.
Absolutely. I mean, the conversation I had, we started with this, you know, deep dive into the archive essentially, which was, I think it was something between 15 and 18,000 images
Oof.
that I had to pour through. So I did the initial edit and then I presented it to Sig and to Liliana. And we talked about what was missing and what we needed. And that sort of determined the next 2.5 years. And the better part of 2024, every week every other week I was on a plane going somewhere to go fulfill the rest of the project. So actually, the next image is a great example of this whole thing because the next image is a picture of the Partagas factory in Cuba the first time I went to Cuba in 2008. And then the image that will follow is what it looks like in 2023, because the interior collapsed and they actually had to move the factory to a different building. And oddly enough, you see the yellows and the kind of vibrancy of what it looks like here. In the next image, you'll see that it actually aged. It became old, which is quite interesting to me. And
Oh,
of course,
wow.
through this in the book because it was so crazy that this literally aged. And of course, how crazy it is that it was a blue sky sunny day on 2008, and then 2024 we've got this old dilapidated
Wow.
factory, and the sky, a storm was coming in and all that stuff. So just, like I said, sometimes things just work out that way. So basically, yes, 15 to 18,000 images, went through stuff. And then what I extrapolated from that was the conversation that I then had with Liliana and Sig, essentially saying the word that I'm going to utilize for the rest of this project, everything I shoot from here on out, is epic. The goal is epic. Now, we're not always going to hit epic, but that's the intent. And so the intent that I took forward was that everything that I was doing, especially the images where I had control, where I was lighting it or I was setting up the situation, replicating something maybe that I had seen that I had but didn't love the shot, then at that point, the goal was always to create epic images, because my point was, with a project like this, the goal of the whole thing is that every single image you look at is something you want to dive into. You want to spend moments looking at this thing. It's not just checking a box to say, oh, we've got that part of the process done, which is a very easy way to go about something like this, to say, okay, well, it's a very predictable process from seed to final packaging. We know exactly what's going to happen. So let's just say, okay, we've got this part, we've got the rolling, we've got the planting of the seed, we've got the cellophane wrapping of the cigar, we've got the boxing. So yes, we had that checklist, but at the same time, with each part of that checklist, I was saying, no, 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 I want an epic image of a boxing shot. I want an epic image of the devining process, which is what you see here, where they take the vine off of the leaf before it gets submitted to the next stage. And so that goal really became my mindset, that everything I'm approaching from here, whether I've got control of the light or I'm just thrown and I've got 10 minutes in a factory that we got to just bust through before we get on to the next location, is to be approaching it from a place of epic proportion. That's what this should feel like.
Interesting. So there was never really like all right, we just need a shot of this. We're gonna get it. More of like a documentary style shot. Everything was kind of, you're going into everything looking like I'm gonna knock this out of the park. It's gotta be the shot. It's gotta draw me in.
Yeah, I think part of it was pushing to have lighting wherever I could,
Okay.
because then I knew I could create it faster than if I was waiting around for it to happen. So many of these factories are factories. They have overhead fluorescent lights. That's all you get. Now, occasionally there are some that are beautiful and have different light. There's one which has like these stained glass window, which you get these different shades of light coming through the windows as the workers are rolling cigars, and it's really beautiful and cool. But most of them are factories in some third world country. So, the reality is that you're not always presented with great light. And so if I have an assistant with me and I have lighting, or if I'm doing it myself, then the opportunity is there to create something that has a vibe to it, as opposed to just capturing what's in front of me.
Interesting. Now, with the story, how much of this is laid out? We talk a lot with people who have done documentaries, long term projects, books, a lot of different projects of this variety. And usually it's okay, you have a general pitch or an idea, but then you don't know what you don't know about the story as it takes shape, or you don't know the story you're chasing. Sometimes with documentaries, it's kind of like, okay, well, we're going to follow this interesting, broad story, but then we're really going to find the story beyond the story. Did that happen here? Or can you talk a little bit about how much do you kind of set in stone going into it, and how much leaves room for navigating through, stuff that you might find out? Is there little stories that as you're working with some of these people that kind of pop up?
Yeah, so of course, there's the predictability of cigars because, as I said, it's a process that you know in a sense what it's like, and I photographed it for so long that it's predictable what's going to happen, and it's very repetitive. So the rolling process, literally, it's the same thing over and over and over and over again. You watch these workers doing this, and their hands, the dexterity in their fingers is amazing to watch, which is why I say, cigar smokers don't necessarily get to appreciate truly what goes into it because they haven't seen that part of the process. But the reality is that there's always got to be some flexibility because you've got the variables of weather, tight spaces, lighting interiors that aren't really lit. A lot of the places where they keep cigars are very dark rooms. The place where they age the cigars quite often are just dark libraries of boxes and boxes and boxes of cigars. And so there's situations where if you're going to create something with the goal of being epic, you either need to have the opportunity to create light or have the opportunity to spend time in a situation. But I don't always get that luxury. So we sort of have this checklist, but then always keeping sort of like that third eye looking for opportunities. There was the image of the guy with his hand up on a rope inside a barn. And that's one of the drying barns that they use for the leaves at the farm. So they take the green leaves off the vines in the stem in the field, and then they string them up onto these bars, and then they hang them in these drying barns for them to turn into the brown leaves that eventually go to the factory. So we were actually just driving from one field to another, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw the building of one of these barns. Now, this is something I had never seen before. So this was at Fuente farm in the Dominican, and I'd never seen them actually doing this. And their barns in particular are quite picturesque. The Fuente family is one of the rare factories and fields that have a design to it, very colorful and beautiful, and really celebrates the country, both in Dominican and Nicaragua now, that you get a vibe when you're at a Fuente house or farm or factory, anything. So they use these thatched roof drying barns, and I saw them actually making the barn. And so I literally, we were in a truck, and I was like, stop, stop, stop. And I jumped out of the car, ran over, and just started photographing. And then there's that thing, and you're a street photographer, so you know how this is. As soon as you do this, you're in trouble because now all of a sudden people know what you're doing, right? And in the old days, which I'm so jealous that I wasn't around in that time, people didn't think about that. This wasn't something. People didn't go like this and didn't freeze what they were doing. They just kept doing what they were doing. They didn't think about it. And nowadays it's, I think, a lot more difficult. So I don't envy your position when you're out on the street and trying to create an image of something that you're seeing in front of you. But as soon as you do this, it changes. And here was a situation where I wanted this very, sneaky look at what I saw out the car window. So having to get them to just relax and go back to what they were doing and forget about me for a moment. And so I intentionally sort of hid, in a sense, behind some of the thatching that was on the ground. And I just made probably 5 or 6 images at tops of the two places where this guy was sort of hanging out. And I just had this opportunity where the light was coming through the unfinished part of the barn, and boom, there you go. And again, technology. 2007, I would have really been pushing ISO. It was dark in there. And even bringing back, if you look at the right corner of that frame, being able to bring back the light that's outside on the leaves that are outside that door, that's today's technology allows for that. Otherwise that would have been blown out years back, I would argue.
I think that'd be a pretty good argument. I mean, technology, we say it all the time. It's like camera gear doesn't matter until it matters. And it's situations like this, it's like, yeah, it's nicer to have the ability to go in there. And I just think there are times where, like you just described, you don't want to carry a lot of gear. You want to be minimal. You kind of want to be a fly on the wall. Flash is unnerving. It can look really great, but I know you're a big light meter guy. So you're taking the time to set up that shot, make sure that the ambient is perfectly balanced with the light you're adding in. And a lot of that can just kind of ruin the sanctity, especially of something like this. I think it can take away. And with the newer technology and being able to push the limits of what we're doing with our cameras, you're pulling in more ambient light. You're able to kind of work in a different way.
And understanding what your gear can do,
Yeah.
there isn't always time to yank the light meter out. So there are those times where I know, and we joke about this in all our, demonstrations. We'll fix it later in post, and I hate that, saying, but at the same time, knowing what tools are available to you is super important, and knowing the latitude of today's cameras. It's very much like when we did print, where you said, okay, well, I know that window is going to blow out a little bit, but I can yank it back a little bit in print and, come back a little bit on it. If we go back to where we were on the images, I think it's just after the guy holding the Civetto.
Yeah. What
So,
what was that before you go on?
so
What
this
was that?
is one more
Go back
back.
one more, Cooper. Yeah.
So that is the civetta, which is what they use to cut the tobacco leaf as they're making the rolling process. And
Okay.
so I was actually photographing this guy rolling, but this was actually that factory. It's the Plasencia factory in Nicaragua, which has those colored stained glass windows in the front. So I just asked if he would mind stepping over to the wall for a moment. He had this great tattoo, which I thought was really cool. And I just love the dirty hands and you know the way that the rust is on the blade and everything. And so I did a couple of different setups with this, which I had him doing this, but also holding a blended batch of the tobacco leaves that he was rolling. Um, but I was going to say that, if you go to the next two images, um, there's a good example of that balance of old and new, and also the difference between lighting something and then taking what's available to you. So the next image, if you click one forward, Cooper, thank you. So this I lit, and we were very specifically getting this story of this one special cigar for the Fuente. This was for the Fuente book exactly, and there was only two rollers in the entire factory that do this very specific cigar. And so we treated this in the sense of that, epic style of saying, well, this is super important, it's a big part of the process, there's going to be a lot written on this, so we need to shoot this in the right way. So lighting it with, a 24-inch umbrella with diffusion just off to the edge, and really dropping the angle of it so that you get this sort of nice vibe as if it's like the sun coming through a window. And then now, Cooper, if you go to the next image, this was in passing. This was strictly in Cuba. I was walking through one of the factories, and it was closed. There was no workers there, but we were able to tour the factory anyway. And this was the remnants of what's left. That is the chopping tool that they use to make the side of the cigar that you light. And basically, it was just sitting on the table with all the shavings and pieces of the cigar that were still there. And essentially, this is just available light with overhead fluorescence. But in post, I warmed it up. I gave it a vibe so that it felt like the previous image, which I had the control over. And that's that balance I was talking about earlier of saying, okay, old image, new image, I don't want you to tell the difference. I want you to look through this entire project and not be able to tell, other than perhaps if one of my subject matters is deceased, or that the chapter just mentioned something about the date that this was made or anything along those lines.
When do you know you're done, Ian? I mean, you said 3 books, 17 years over that span. Is this something that do you guys discuss the length of the project, or do you recommend to people when going into a project? Should you treat it as if it's open ended and kind of just take it where it goes, or is it better sometimes to put a like set a snooze time snooze alarm, say, all right, let me check in on this in X amount of time.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie, the 15 to 18,000 images I mentioned sat dormant for about 12 years in that period of
No
time.
way.
And I always thought in my head, should I just throw all this into stock? And obviously, there's no money in stock anymore. And,
Mhm.
that sort of deterred me at the time of just going ahead and doing it. And so I waited, and, fortune favors the bold, I guess. So it's because it ended up working out. Obviously, I had this body of work that I could present to potential clients and so on and so forth. But it's not an industry where there are a lot of photographers, even though it's a very romantic subject matter. There's not a lot of photographers doing it. A lot of the factories and companies have their own in-house person that shoots bulk of their stuff, and it works out just fine like that for them. So I had one, really strong client with General Cigar that had me working over those years, but it had nothing to do with the stuff that was in my archive. And then, it had Sig not mentioned it that day, and then I think it was like I was back in the Dominican for one specific thing which we did not have, and I was in the office of the owner of this factory, and he had on his wall these drawings of like the 17 major players in the cigar industry, some who are long past, but out of the 17, I had photographed 11, which is crazy. And I remember standing in his office and I texted to Sig and I was like, I'm looking at this picture and I can't believe I have more than 50% of these people in my archive, some who died before I even picked up a camera. So, it's pretty crazy to see that. And I guess the answer to your question is you just never know, right? And something could come around, especially if it's timeless. And cigars, in my opinion, are pretty timeless in that sense because the process hasn't really changed without the sort of asterisks of technology and improvements on the process and machinery and things like that. But you walk into these factories, you're stepping back in time most of the situations.
Yeah. Is there anything that if you could step back in time, would you change? I mean, you've obviously learned a lot as a photographer and as a professional in that length of time, but is there anything that if you could go back and start this process or something you might advise someone who's looking to jump into the journey of a long-term project that you think is really key to getting this process underway?
I think it's about constant evaluation, right? That's what makes us grow as photographers, that we spend a lot of time looking back at work. I actually just posted this in the beginning of the month because people get on about new year, new me, all that stuff. I'm always like, no, it's new year. Look back and see where you've been and how can you improve from where you've been. And I'm never satisfied as a photographer. I always know I could be doing more. I always know I could be doing better. So I'm constantly looking at things that I've done and questioning what could I have done different? What could I have done better? And I talk about it in terms of retouching even. You could always keep going back to images and finding something to fix up a little bit. So you get it to a place where maybe you have a deadline, maybe you have to get, or whatever the case might be. But the reality is that you could always go back to those images and find something to fine tune maybe. And I think with something like this, where it's long term, it's what can I do to, showcase my growth as a photographer? What can I do to enhance this project as a whole? And that goes back to that comment I made about the goal of being epic with everything that I was doing. So approaching everything from a place of saying I can improve on where I was, even if I took an image in 2007 or 2010 that worked really well, what can I do now to create an image of the same thing but better? And that's I think probably the best thing I can say towards that.
Mhm. So how does it work? I mean, you said that a lot of these images are what, almost 20,000 images you're just sitting on. And in the age of social media where it's like, okay, we got to keep putting stuff out there in drips and drabs. I've heard from, various people say, well, if you want to get something published, never publish it. You have to, it has to be something where if a book publisher is going to take on, they're going to want to know, where has this image been seen? Where has this image been shown or published? Is there any truth to that? And how do you handle it? Especially again, long term, you're sitting on these. It's one of those things where it's like, well, am I going to do anything with them? If you obviously got some bangers in there you want to show, how do you handle it?
It's funny because I don't think uh, attached myself to that argument, quite honestly.
I've heard it from various people, and it's like everybody's different though. You know, everybody's experience. I've heard some people, it's like, no, you want to put your stuff out there, put your best work out there. It's like the same thing as some people say, all right, well, I keep my 10 best images on a rotation where I share them every 6 months to a year or on social media. And then some people are like, well, no, I never reshare their same image twice.
I'm
So it's always
probably
interesting to
guilty.
hear different perspectives.
I'm probably guilty of not going back enough and resharing stuff, because you do have new audience after a period of time, right? So
Yeah.
maybe have never seen the Steven Tyler portrait or whatever the case might be. I mean, today I posted the Jersey Shore shoot that I did, years back, and it's, I was again sort of going back to where I was at that time and talking about some of those things, and I used it as a platform to talk about my crew and how important crew is. So yeah, there's a value in going back for sure. Um, I would say as a whole, like, if a strong image is a strong image, there's no reason it can't be repeated somewhere. I mean, uh, if you go through any of Irving Penn book, you're going to see the same image in one of those books going on to another book, and it's there that is there for a reason. It's something people want to see, whether it's for the first time or the 10th time. And that's always my goal, is to have these sort of images around me that are what I love to call evergreens. And I make the same argument for my portfolio that, Steven Tyler, for example, he's probably going to always be in my portfolio because that image represents everything that I can do and want to do as a photographer, even though it's old at this point now. And I'm not always taking those images out of my portfolio because I still want people to see that style of work that I do and understand that that's what I can do. Now I'm a much better photographer than I was at the time I made that portrait, but that was a big step at that point. And I would make the argument that that image still belongs amongst the new images with the better lighting and the better skills and all that stuff, because it still represents what I'm capable of. And I think that trumps any other argument in terms of, oh, well, that image is old, so it shouldn't be in there, or it's been seen before, so it shouldn't be in there.
Dude, you just completely validated my existence. I'm like, if Ian says it's okay to share something, it's okay.
Well, your fashion choices are beyond me, so that's a whole other thing. But if I help you as a photographer, great.
There we go. We're on our own for the fashion.
Yeah,
Don't
yeah.
look at me either. Um, I saved it until the final 10 minutes because it's one of those topics that we could just drag on and on about. But making a book, it's like I, I don't even know how we sum it up in such a a short amount of time. But the process of making a book, can you just share a little bit about your experience and how you've learned? Because that's another one where, depending on who you talk to, depending on what the situation is, it's such a broad, vast ocean of experiences with making a book. Some people say it's the greatest thing ever. I think print, and I think having a book is kind of like the pièce de résistance. Like, that's what everyone wants. It's like it stops people in their tracks when you hand them a book and let them thumb through it. What's your experience been like over the years and ultimately on this most recent project?
I mean, absolutely. The coffee table, that's what you want. People walk into your home and say, "Oh my God, is that your book?" Nowadays, it's more often somebody goes to my Instagram and says, "Oh my God, you actually are a real photographer? Like, you're not just taking pictures of kids on the beach. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but like, yeah, that's because I don't really scream it out. I don't wear a shirt with my pictures on or anything. But a coffee table book says it all, right? It's a certain level of achievement in, even if you do it yourself, right? And fake it till you make it. I'm a big proponent of that. I was putting out books through Blurb for years before I had one published, because I wanted things sitting around my house with my imagery in them in that style, right? Um, the process itself, it's exactly what you said. It's a labor of love because it takes time. It's not an immediate fix, and today we all want that immediate fix. And then as well, it's not a lucrative business. It really isn't. So don't go into it thinking I'm going to make millions on a book. You're probably not. If you make anything, you're lucky. If you make it break even, you're lucky. If you make a few bucks and you can put in your pocket, it doesn't ever equate to the amount of time that you spend on it. I mean, 2024, for example, being on the road every other week for the first, 3 months of the year, including going to Australia for 5 days. I mean, that is not enough time in Australia to go photograph one thing, mind you. That's it. I just went for one thing, and that's it.
Wow.
My week in London was insane. We shot so much, I was blind by the end, and mind you, doing portraits at an event with everyone smoking cigars in an old, uh, you know, shop in London with low roofs. It was like I smoked 18 cigars. Now I do enjoy an occasional cigar, but not like that. I want some fresh air as well. If I'm on the golf course, fantastic. But in a room like that, I was dying. I mean, I couldn't even see at the end of the night because of all the smoke and shooting and focusing and making sure nobody's banging into my setup and all that stuff. But, you can't put a value on that experience. So to sum it up, a book is worth it for the experience to say, well, I did that. And now you've got this very physical example of what you accomplished, no matter how much time it took you, no matter how much of the pain was there in the process. Because at the end of the day, if the book showcases who you are as a photographer, you've done the right thing.
Boom. Words to live by right there. I could see you up in there. You got the taking pictures with the little air blower up in there.
Oh man,
Man,
I should have done that. That's actually a
you
great.
got come on, man. Get the rig on.
Oh boy, I could have done that. That would have been a good ugly rig posting.
Canon Professional Services probably made a ton over those 17 years of sending in. Were you doing your own cleanings or are you sending it in or?
I always have CPS do my cleaning. I don't want to touch that.
I can only imagine. Well, no, it was great. I've been super excited. I mean, we talked about this idea months ago. I was excited to finally have you get on in here because we've gotten drips and drabs of this project over the last couple months and seeing some of these image pop up here and there. But it's cool to see and hear you talk about it, and it kind of ties the knot from where we started this, where we were talking about passion and personal, and it's like you can see the passion and you can see where, and that's super inspiring to me. You've always been an inspiring force for me because you will literally take on anything and turn it into great. And I love that, that whole epicness monologue where, yeah, you should look at stuff. And I think we all need to approach things like you approach things. And it's like, there's a solution to every problem. We want to make our work epic. We want to stand
Yeah,
out.
challenge, not problem.
See, I'm screwing it up. I'll
Right.
start in 2026. Challenges, challenges, challenges,
Yes. Yes.
challenges. But no, that's a perfect way to sum it up. I mean, it's a beautiful body of work.
Thank you.
And to turn out such a beautiful, impassioned body of work for something that you're not even ingrained in like that, like you're not a smoker. And I think for me, that's always been something that's deterred me from certain jobs. Is like, well, I'm not passionate about this. Should I really be the one to photograph it? And it kind of flips that thinking on its head and says that, yeah, you can do it. You have to reach within and really find out why you're photographing. What's your angle? What are you going to pull out of this and make it something that is yours?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, on a commercial side, obviously I face that a lot. There's times where, I always joke about, I don't shoot weddings, kids, or pets, and it's a joke or whatever. But, there's jobs where I have to photograph kids, and there's jobs where I have to photograph pets. And, I still need to bring my approach to whatever is in front of me in that same way, that I'm here to do the job. And whether it's personal or commercial, it's always going to come from that place where I'm here to do the best job I can possibly do. And that's always the mindset, that I'm very tunnel vision about that aspect of it.
That's why we love having you on. Selfishly, you're like my every couple months I get a nice motivation kick in the butt to go out there and pick up my camera and actually do something.
Well, you do a good job at it. So thank you.
Nah, thank you, man. It goes same for you. You're one of our most inspiring forces here on the channel, Ian. It's always great to have you on. Tell us where we can find it when it's released. I know Fred is dropping some links over there in the YouTube chat, but yeah, drop
Yeah.
any.
So the book is on pre-sale right now at sigculture.com. That's SIG culture.com. And if you go to my Instagram at Ian Spanier, there's a link tree linked to it as well. So that's an easy path to it. And we are slated for early February right now. Let's keep our fingers crossed that no shipping issues take place. But as I said, the pre-order is available, so you can always start that now. I will most likely be in New York for a book signing, so I'll keep you posted on that
Oh,
and
nice. Yeah.
invite you, and we can smoke a cigar. And uh, there'll be other appearances as well that are forthcoming. Certainly after February, I think we'll be looking into the spring. Hopefully, we're going to make it to London and possibly some other locations as well. I'm trying to get something out here in LA. We did not get a lot of book signings for the last book I did, so I'd really like to get that to happen. So I'll keep you guys posted on that. Obviously, everything up on my Instagram. I post there primarily, also on Facebook and LinkedIn and all those other fun places. But most of my stuff is Instagram based.
Awesome. And I will say my usual unsolicited Ian Spanier pitch. One of my favorite follows on Instagram. His work is incredible, as you guys have seen, but he's also peeling back the curtain more than a lot of the people out there. There's a lot of gatekeeping out there, and Ian is so good about breaking down and helping people learn, and diving into his setups and what it takes to get a certain shot. So we thank you for that, as always, Ian. Go check him out. Send him a follow on Instagram and pre-order the book. We love to support our speakers here, but a huge thank you to Ian and everybody behind the scenes over there that's been working with you to put these books out. And we thank you for your experience and your knowledge that you always impart on us. So huge thank you to Ian, the entire team over there working on that book and getting that released, and to all of our viewers hanging with us through everything. Send an extra special we want to send our thoughts and wishes out to everybody out there. And Ian, we know you're out in LA, and LA is going through a lot right now. So to all of our viewers, creatives out there, Ian, we hope you're staying safe, and everybody else out there as well. We do hope that you guys are all holding it together, staying safe, and wish the best for you all. So on behalf of the Event Space team, another edition of the Event Space in the books. Catch you on next time.